The Ancient City, Book 4, Chapter 2, The Plebians. We must now point out another element of the population, which was below the clients themselves, and which, originally low, insensibly acquired strength enough to break the ancient social organization. This class, which became more numerous at Rome than in any other city, was there called the Plebs. We must understand the origin and character of this class to understand the part it played in the history of the city and of the family among the ancients. The plebeians were not the clients. The historians of antiquity do not confound these two classes. Livy, in one place, says, "The plebeians did not wish to take part in the election of the consuls. The consuls were therefore elected by the patricians and their clients." And in another, "The plebeians complained that the patricians had too much influence in the comitia on account of the votes of their clients." In Dionysius of Halicarnassus we read, "The plebeians left Rome and retired to Mons Sacer. The patricians remained alone in the city with their clients." And farther along, "The plebeians, being dissatisfied, refused to enroll their names. The patricians, with their clients, took arms and carried on the war." These plebeians, completely distinct from the clients, formed no part of what was called the Roman people, at least in the first centuries. In an old prayer, which was still repeated in the time of the Punic Wars, the gods were asked to be propitious to the people and to the plebs. The plebs were not, therefore, comprised in the people, at any rate, not originally. The people comprised the patricians and the clients. The plebs were excluded. What constituted the peculiar character of the plebs was that they were foreign to the religious organization of the city, and even to that of the family. By this we recognize the plebeian and distinguish him from the client. The client shared at least in the worship of his patron, and made a part of the family and of the gens. The plebeian at first had no worship, and knew nothing of the sacred family. What we have already seen of the social and religious state of ancient times explains to us how this class took its rise. Religion was not propagated. Born in a family, it remained, as it were, shut in there. Each family was forced to create its creed, its gods, and its worship. But there must have been, in those times, so distant from us, a great number of families in which the mind had not the power to create gods, to arrange a doctrine, to institute a worship, to invent hymns and the rhythm of the prayer. These families naturally found themselves in a state of inferiority compared with those who had a religion, and could not make a part of society with them. They entered neither into the curies nor into the city. In the course of time, it even happened that families which had a religion lost it, either by negligence, forgetting the rites, or by one of those crimes which prevented a man from approaching his hearth and continuing his worship. It must have happened also that clients, on account of crime or bad treatment, quitted the family and renounced its religion. The son, too, who was born of a marriage in which the rites had not been performed, was reputed a bastard, like one who had been born of adultery, and the family religion did not exist for him. All these men, excluded from the family and from the worship, fell into the class of men without a sacred fire, that is to say, became plebeians. We find this class around almost all the ancient cities, but separated by a line of demarcation. Originally, a Greek city was double. There was the city, properly so called, polis, which was built ordinarily on the summit of some hill. It had been built with the religious rites and enclosed the sanctuary of the national gods. At the foot of the hill was found an agglomeration of houses, which were built without any religious ceremony and without a sacred enclosure. These were the dwellings of the plebeians, who could not live in the sacred city. At Rome, the difference between the two classes was striking. The city of the patricians and their clients was the one that Romulus founded, according to the rites, on the Palatine. The dwellings of the plebs were in the Asylum, a species of enclosure situated on the slope of the Capitoline Hill, where Romulus admitted people without hearth or home, whom he could not admit into his city. Later, when new plebeians came to Rome, as they were strangers to the religion of the city, they were established on the Aventine, that is to say, without the pomerium, or religious city. One word characterizes these plebeians. They were without a hearth. They did not possess, in the beginning at least, any domestic altars. Their adversaries were always reproaching them with having no ancestors, which certainly meant that they had not the worship of ancestors, and had no family tomb where they could carry their funeral repast. They had no father, pater, that is to say, they ascended the series of their ascendants in vain. They never arrived at a religious family chief. They had no family, gentem non habent, that is to say, they had only the natural family. As to the one which religion formed and constituted, they had not that. The sacred marriage did not exist for them. They knew not its rights. Having no hearth, the union that the hearth established was forbidden to them. Therefore, the patricians, who knew no other regular union than that which united husband and wife in the presence of the domestic divinity, could say, in speaking of the plebeians, connubia promiscua habent more ferarum. They have promiscuous marriages in the manner of beasts. There was no family for them, no paternal authority. They had the power over their children which strength gave them. But that sacred authority with which religion clothed the father, they had not. For them there was no right of property, for all property was established and consecrated by a hearth, a tomb, and termini, that is to say, by all the elements of the domestic worship. If the plebeian possessed land, that land had no sacred character. It was profane, and had no boundaries. But could he hold land in the earliest times? We know that at Rome no one could exercise the right of property if he was not a citizen, and the plebeian in the first ages of Rome was not a citizen. According to the jurisconsult, one could not be a proprietor except by quiritary right, but the plebeians were not counted at first among the quirites. At the foundation of Rome, the ager Romanus was divided up among the tribes, the curies, and the gentes. Now the plebeians, who belonged to none of these groups, certainly did not share in this division. These plebeians, who had no religion, had not the qualification which enabled a man to make a portion of the soil his own. We know that they long inhabited the Aventine, and built houses there, but it was only after 3 centuries and many struggles that they finally obtained the ownership of this territory. For the plebeians there was no law, no justice, since the law was the decision of religion, and the procedure was a body of rights. The client had the benefit of the Roman franchise through his patron, but for the plebeian this right did not exist. An ancient historian says formally that the 6th king of Rome was the first to make laws for the plebs, whilst the patricians had had theirs for a long time. It appears even that these laws were afterwards withdrawn from the plebs, or that, not being founded upon religion, the patricians refused to pay any attention to them. For we see in the historian that when tribunes were created, a special law was required to protect their lives and liberty, and that this law was worded thus: "Let no one undertake to strike or kill a tribune, as he would one of the plebs." It seems, therefore, that anyone had a right to strike or to kill a plebeian, or at least that this misdeed committed against a man who was beyond the pale of the law was not punished. The plebeians had no political rights. They were not at first citizens, and no one among them could be a magistrate. For 2 centuries there was no other assembly at Rome than that of the Curies, and the Curies did not include the plebeians. The plebs did not even enter into the composition of the army so long as it was distributed by Curies. But what manifestly separated the plebeian from the patrician was that the plebeian had no part in the religion of the city. It was impossible for him to fill the priestly office. We may even suppose that in the earliest ages, prayer was forbidden him, and that the rites could not be revealed to him. It was as in India, where the Sudra should always be ignorant of the sacred formulas. He was a foreigner, and consequently his presence alone defiled the sacrifice. He was repulsed by the gods. Between him and the patrician, there was all the distance that religion could place between 2 men. The plebs were a despised and abject class, beyond the pale of religion, law, society, and the family. The patrician could compare such an existence only with that of the brutes, more ferarum. The touch of the plebeian was impure. The decemvirs, in their first 10 tables, had forgotten to interdict marriage between the 2 orders, for these first decemvirs were all patricians, and it never entered the mind of one of them that such a marriage was possible. We see how many classes in the primitive age of the cities were superposed one above another. At the head was the aristocracy of family chiefs, those whom the official language of Rome called patres, whom the clients called reges, whom the Odyssey names vasilis, or anactes. Below were the younger branches of the families. Still lower were the clients, and lowest were the plebs. This distinction of classes came from religion, for at the time when the ancestors of the Greeks, the Italians, and the Hindus still lived together in Central Asia, religion had said, "The oldest shall offer prayer." From this came the preeminence of the oldest in everything. The oldest branch in every family had been the sacerdotal and dominant branch. Still, religion made great account of the younger branches, who were a species of reserve, to replace the older branch someday if it should become extinct, and to save the worship. It also made some account of the client, and even of the slave, because they assisted in the religious acts. But the plebeian, who had no part in the worship, it reckoned as absolutely of no account. The ranks had been thus fixed. But none of the social arrangements which man studies out and establishes is unchangeable. This carried in itself the germ of disease and death, which was too great an inequality. Many men had an interest in destroying a social organization that had no benefits for them.